the Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. The Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. The Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. The Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. The Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. the Senate of Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. The Senate of Virginia.
The Senate will come to order. Senators, please take their seats. Those persons not entitled to the privileges of the floor will retire to the gallery. The senators and all in attendance will please stand if you are able, and will be led in prayer by the Reverend Renee R. Teague of the Wesley United Methodist Church.
Wesley United Methodist Church in Hopewell, Virginia, thank you very much. Let us pray. Holy, ever-present one, fill this place with your love. Fill each heart with kindness and generosity of spirit. Build bridges where we have created division. Heal wounds that we have inflicted in one another. Lift apology and acceptance within each person here. We humbly ask that you bring Virginia to a place of leadership as a witness to unity and working together. May the Commonwealth once again help to lead the United States of America into the light from the darkness, making this a land of hope for all the world. Our country is in deep need of leaders who put the good of the country above their own pursuits, well-being and positions of power. Help these people in this room to be the state's people that they were elected to be. In this time of division and strife, bring to these people your spirit of compassion and compromise. Help each one to lay aside hidden agendas and focus on one agenda, the well-being of the people of the Commonwealth. May the goal not be the well-being of the loud, the visible, the powerful, the wealthy, but rather the small child in the poorest area, the elderly widow without voice or wealth, the good of the Commonwealth and indeed of the United States of America. Bless these representatives with clearness of mind, clarity of purpose, and the strength to do the work set before them. Amen.
Beginner's mistake, I apologize, but everyone please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which is going to be led by Assistant Fiscal Officer Geneva Talaz.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're ready? Okay, the clerk will call the roll. All those present, please say aye. Or vote aye. The clerk will close the roll.
You have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. The Senate Journal for the last day we were here.
Senate Journal for Monday, July 1st, 2024. Thank you.
Okay, the senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas, moves that the reading of the journal be waived. All in favor of waiving the reading of the journal will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 26, no 7.
We're climbing. The reading is waived. I think we missed it, didn't we?
No, we did. It's a majority.
Majority? Okay.
Communication.
Okay. Okay. The clerk will report any communications from the House of Delegates.
I do not have any, Mr. President.
The clerk will report any communications from the governor.
I do not have any, Mr. President.
Now comes the time in the morning hour when we have the distinct honor of welcoming our distinguished guests here in the Senate Gallery. I will give my daily reminder that the way this will proceed is that a senator will stand up and recognize an individual or a group. I will then offer the warm welcome of the Senate, and at the very end, we will all applaud together. Senator McDougall, the senator from Hanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise for two purposes. The first, I'd ask that the journal reflect that the senator from Franklin is away on pressing personal business.
The journal will so reflect. Senator McDougall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the next is an introduction. Mr. President, members of the Senate want to offer the warm welcome of the Senate and thanks to the Reverend Renee Teague from Wesley United Methodist Church. Reverend Teague was previously at Enon United Methodist Church in Mechanicsville and is a resident of Mechanicsville. And thank her for being here. As I was talking with her earlier today, she was very appreciative of the invitation and the ability to start us off with the prayer this afternoon. If you could give her our thanks and warm welcome.
Reverend, thank you so much for starting us off the right way. I'd ask the Senate to give her the warm greetings to the Senate. And now, the senator from Chesapeake, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to request that a leave of absence for my desk mate, the senator from Mecklenburg, on account of pressing personal business.
The journal will so reflect. Okay. The senator from Lynchburg, Senator Peake.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I rise for the purposes of an introduction, although we don't have green sheets yet. Are they coming? All right.
We don't have any green sheets.
So I would ask, we have in the gallery visiting us today, Miss Reba Woodson. If you could please stand. Reba is 8 years old. She is joined with us today by her mother, Heidi Wilson, and her father, Lee Woodson, and her grandparents, Roger and Sylvia Campbell. Now, there they are. Yes, go ahead and rise. I saw him, and the grandfather has a nice cowboy hat in a big vehicle. I saw him driving up. Now, Mr. President, a lot of people think this big TV show, Yellowstone, and so they think all your bull riders and your horse riders are out there in Wyoming and Montana. But ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I'm here to tell you that is not true. In fact, some of them reside in your district, Mr. President. Yes, right in Amherst County. And Madam President, who's not with us today, attended a rodeo that was held in Nelson County, also in your district, Mr. President, where she ran into Reba and invited her to come see us in the Senate. Let me tell you a thing or two about Reba. This extraordinary 8-year-old from Amherst County has an impressive passion for competitive sport of bull riding. And to say that she enjoys it is quite an understatement. Reba started riding at 6 years old, and she loves rodeos. She is an award-winning bull riding champion. She qualified for 2 world finals in 2023 and was one of 2 kids to qualify and the only girl to qualify. This year, she won her division to become the 2024 Frostbite Bull Riding Champion. Wow. And she lives in your district, wow, Mr. President. Reba, I wish you nothing but the best in your future with your skills and determination. You've already shown that at such a young age, there's no doubt that great success lies ahead for you. Madam President is very disappointed, Winsome Sears, Lieutenant Governor, that she could not be here to greet you. But, Mr. President, I ask that you please give Reba and her family the warm welcome of the Senate.
Reba, that's a very impressive introduction. You sound like a very tough woman. And thank you for bringing your parents and grandparents, letting them tag along. I'd ask the members of the Senate to give the Campbells and the Woodsons and Reba a big Senate welcome. Are there other introductions? Well, and most people weren't introduced, but I welcome you here to the Senate of Virginia, and I'm glad you came to see your government in action. Is there any other business for the morning hour? The clerk will call the calendar.
Senate calendar for Thursday, July 18th, 2024. Uncontested calendar, Senate bill on first reading. Senate Bill 6012, a bill relating to General Appropriations Act, designation of additional surplus, repeal of modifications to certain waiver programs. Reported from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations.
Call in the Senator Lucas, the senator from Portsmouth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the rules be suspended and the second constitutional reading of the title of the bill be dispensed with.
All in favor of the motion will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Is there anyone who desires to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, no 0.
The reading of the title is dispensed with. Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the rules be suspended and the third constitutional reading of the title of the bill be dispensed with.
All in favor of the motion will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Is there any senator who wishes to change his or her vote? The clerk will call the roll. The clerk will close the roll. I apologize.
Ayes 34, no 0.
The reading of the title is dispensed with. Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the bill pass and speak into the bill.
Senator Lucas has the floor.
Yes. Mr. President, this legislation fully repeals the modification to the VIMS DEP program and provides an additional $90 million from the anticipated FY 2024 surplus. I heard this morning that we should not legislate through the budget. Well, everyone on this floor should listen to this. The budget is a piece of legislation. Modifications to VMDEP were originally in a governor's bill and were in both the House and Senate budgets. It was not snuck into the budget, nor did it happen in secrecy. That being said, this bill offers a resolution while we have an independent study conducted by JLARC. The JLARC study will help us understand the program and address the sustainability of the program. Between the JLARC study and the $65 million per year, I am comfortable with the repeal while we continue to work towards solutions to make this program sustainable for all veteran families in the long term. Higher education should be affordable for all students, and I am committed to ensuring that we pass budgets for the next 3 years to accomplish that task. And with that, Mr. President, I again renew my motion that the bill, Senate Bill 6012, pass.
Senator from Hanover, Senator McDougal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the motion.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm happy that we're at this day where we can reset on this program and have a continued conversation. As we've had this conversation over the last couple months, one of the things that we have advocated, and I think is important and reflected in this legislation currently, is that we have to reset the program from the beginning and then have the conversation with people that might have differing views on how the program should look going forward. It is important that we restore that confidence to the family members that are affected most dramatically by this program. So, Mr. President, this legislation currently does that. It repeals the language that was originally in the budget and allows the additional groups, some set forward by the governor, some set forward by the chairman of the Finance Committee, and some others set forward by other bodies within this building, and some by JLARC, to be able to put forward recommendations of whether the program should be changed in any direction, but it allows people's voices to be heard.
The senator from Stafford, Senator Durant.
Thank you, Mr. President. To speak to the bill?
Yes, the
okay.
senator has the floor.
Thank you. You know, I also echo the sentiments, I think, by everyone here that we are grateful that we have the opportunity to reset this. That's what all of those who are here and who are listening have been asking for months. Mr. President, as I said quite some time ago, speaking to many of my colleagues, I was one of the first to start to receive a great deal of feedback just by the sheer density of veterans that live in my district. And I heard their concerns early on. You know, I think from their perspective, had we had this opportunity for them to speak to it early on, this may have gone quite differently. You know, what's probably one of the most disappointing parts of this is that the sheer cost of how this has affected the taxpayers of Virginia is unnecessary. I did a little bit of research on the cost to go into special session, how much it costs to bring the House in, how much it costs to bring in the Senate. This is calculated to about $100,000 for Virginia taxpayers. It's unnecessary. It did not have to happen this way. We all know this. Do not forget, had we gone from the very beginning, when it was a work group, where all of you had had an opportunity to listen to it, and unfortunately the temperature came up so high, it's just been a really disappointing and disrespectful way for the electorate to see this process. You know, I mentioned some of the costs that I've heard a lot of people express and how they feel that it's become too expensive to respect those who have served our country. That's deeply hurtful to all of those who have, you know, as a veteran wife, sat there and felt the worry, you know, when my loved one was at war, worrying that there's going to be a knock at the door. And those who have had that knock at the door. This is the very least that we can do as Virginia. And moving forward, it needs to maintain that level of respect because that is absolutely what you all deserve. If we are now moving forward in Virginia with a pretty significant line item in our budget, we have to look at all of our costs, all of it. And we see a real significant cost in our higher education for things that really are questionable on the return of investment. A lot of us have had those conversations. I certainly hear from them. Those departments, what is the return on their investment? We've got DEI departments, and yet they say we can't afford Virginia veterans. We have those who are undocumented, and they're getting millions of dollars from the Commonwealth, and yet they're saying we can't afford the veterans. I starkly and strongly disagree with this. So moving forward, when we have the conversation for the next session, we must remember the obligation that we have to them and what they deserve. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Stewart, the gentleman from, or the senator from King George County.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
It's that tie. Mr. President, speaking to the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the senator from Portsmouth for bringing forth this legislation. I think it's a good bill, and I've signed on to it, and I don't know if anybody else can at this point or not. You know, I said this morning, and I've said it on the floor of the Senate before.
Does he know?
We made a mistake, and we're fixing it. And we're going to make sure that anything is done through the proper process if changes need to be made, so that the folks in the gallery today and others who are interested in this can have their voices heard. That's the process in a citizen legislature, and that's the process that will be used forward. And I think all of us are committed to that and to hearing from folks and hearing their positions. And again, folks may not like it if changes are made, but they will be a part of that process and their voices will be heard in that process. And so I'm just thankful that we're able to fix this today, put it back in the position it was in, and then make sure that this goes through the process going forward. I hope that we'll pass the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Arlington, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to speak to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I will just say there has been an advantage to the Senate coming back twice on this bill because we were able to get end-of-year estimates on closing out our books. Our fiscal year ends June 30th. We did have some end-of-year growth, and we are now funding this program fully to the degree we understand the costs for each year of the next biennium. And that was not the case in either of the previous bills, in part because we were not at the place where we had good estimates, and part of it was timing. So there has been an advantage to having an extended period to look at this. Secondly, I do want to note that there will continue to be an evaluation of this program, and I want to say that the evaluation of the program in no way is predetermined or necessarily going with a bias that perhaps the program should be cut or restrictions should be placed on the program. We are attempting, those of us who were tasked with looking at this, the select committee that the chairman of the finance committee established, there's the JLARC committee, and there's the task force that the governor established. We want to see what the benefits are. There may be enormous economic benefits from funding this program. We don't know that. We would like to understand how our universities are actually paying for the cost of the students who are on the scholarship, the VMSDE program scholarship. Some say they're shifting costs to tuition-paying students. They may not be. I don't know if that's the case. But we need to figure out what the universities are doing, how they're managing this program, how much support they're providing to the VMSDE program recipients. So there's a lot to look at in all of this. And this program is worthy of attention. So I think that those in the audience, the advocates, other stakeholders, our college and university friends, we need to look at this with shared values, with the expectation that it is our obligation to make the program viable. It is also our obligation to honor the service of our veterans, and it's our obligation to look for economic growth where a pathway might lead us down that road. So with those remarks, I guess I've shared my thoughts. Mr. President, I once again ask that the Senate pass this bill. Thank you.
Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Averill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the bill.
Senator has 4.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to clarify a few things here as we go to pass this legislation. First of all, I heard some comments talking about how many days we were here, and I just want to remind everybody the reason we had to come here 3 days is, first of all, the governor threatened to call us into special session if we did not call ourselves back. And if you look back at the history of the last couple decades, the only time special sessions ever work in one day is when there's an agreement before everybody comes into session. Trying to actually legislate in special session while we're all scattered to the wind and trying to live our lives and work our jobs is often very difficult because it's hard to get enough bodies in the room, and it's also hard to get everybody to focus. And it also requires 5 days to legislate a bill unless there's bipartisan cooperation on the legislation. And so the first day we were here was basically because the governor said he was going to call us back even without an agreement. And what that meant was we had to figure out a day to come, and we ended up being here, and it ended up being 1919. If you all remember the vote at the end of the day, we tried to adjourn. The reason we had to come back a second day is because we could not get bipartisan cooperation on exactly how to come back and when to come back. And so we had to come back 3 days instead of 1 day because we could not get bipartisan cooperation on how to solve this problem. So I just want to remind everybody that the reason taxpayers had to spend all this extra money to solve this problem is because people wouldn't cooperate. First of all. Secondly, there's not a single person on this side of the aisle that has said veterans are too expensive for anything. The debate from the very beginning has not been the expense. The debate has been who is going to pay. And the reality is that this program had become so successful that we now had students that were receiving Pell Grants, students that were on financial aid, students who were taking out loans to pay for their education that were funding this program instead of the taxpayers. And it's been the position of this caucus throughout this process that this is a worthy program that taxpayers ought to fund instead of children who can't afford to go to college or students, young people who can't afford to go to college. That has been the fight. And this caucus has been fighting, this side of the aisle at least, has been fighting for that from the very beginning. And I just want to make sure that the record is really clear on that, Mr. President, because this debate has become very confused over the last 2 months. And this caucus stands firm with veterans on all their issues. And we're very excited to support this program, which, by the way, the expansion which made it so popular, I will remind everybody, was sponsored by 2 Democrats. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, the question is, shall Senate Bill 6012 pass? All in favor of passage of the bill will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Are there any senators who wish to change their votes? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, no 0.
Ayes 38, no 0. The bill passes. Senator Averill, the senator from Eastern Fairfax.
Memorial resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the memorial resolutions on pages 1 through 2 be considered in the block in the usual manner, waiving the reading of the resolutions thereof, with the understanding that any senator desiring to remove a resolution from the block shall do so after the clerk has read the title of the resolution.
Okay, the question is, shall the memorial resolutions on pages 1 and 2 of the calendar be considered in the block in the usual manner, waiving the reading of the resolutions thereof, with the understanding that any senator desiring a resolution to be removed from the block will do so after the clerk has read the title of the resolution. All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The resolutions are before us in the block. The clerk will read the titles of the memorial resolutions.
Senate Resolution 631, celebrating the life of Kimberly Drew Wright. Senate Resolution 633, celebrating the life of Jeffrey L. Newton. Senate Resolution 637, celebrating the life of Colonel Portia L. Taylor, United States Army, retired. Senate Resolution 638, celebrating the life of Chris K. Skordas. Senate Resolution 639, celebrating the life of the Reverend Pamela Holly McLaughlin. Senate Resolution 640, celebrating the life of Frank Kilgore. Senate Resolution 643, celebrating the life of Trixie Averill. Senate Resolution 644, celebrating the life of Mary Catherine Gause.
Mr. President.
Senator Suderland, Senator from Roanoke County.
Can Senate Resolution 644 please come out of the block?
Senate Resolution 644 is out of the block.
Senate Resolution 646, celebrating the life of Dollie P. Wells. Senate Resolution 647, celebrating the life of Bishop John H. Colander.
Okay, the resolutions, all except Senate Resolution 644 on page 2 of the calendar, will be agreed to in the usual manner. All those in favor of agreeing to the memorial resolutions, please rise. Resolutions are agreed to. Okay, the senator from Roanoke County, Senator Suderland.
Thank you, Madam. Wow, this is great. What change? Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Resolution 644 pass and speaking to it briefly.
Senator Suderland.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I think it's great that we're all making the mistake that we've been saying Madam President so long now. But briefly, Senate Resolution 644 memorializes a former Senate employee, Kathy Gause, who I got to work with for several years here in Senator Smith's office. She was a wonderful Southern lady. She was the first person people usually interacted with when they called our office, and they were greeted with her wonderful voice. And also when they'd visit us, she was very kind. And as everyone's aware here, when people call the office, they're not always happy. That's why they're calling to get help. And she was a great person to be the first person they spoke to help get them on that path of getting help. And I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to pass Senate Resolution 644.
Okay, the resolution will be agreed to in the usual manner. All those in favor of agreeing to Memorial Resolution 644, please rise. Resolution's agreed to. Senator Averill, the senator from Eastern Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the commending resolutions on page 3 be considered in the block by the voice vote, waiving the reading of the resolutions with the understanding that any senator desiring to remove a resolution from the block shall do so after the clerk has read the number of the resolution.
The question is, shall the commending resolutions on page 3 of the calendar be considered in the block by voice vote, waiving the reading of the resolutions with the understanding that any senator desiring a resolution removed from the block do so after the clerk has read the number of the resolutions. All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The resolutions are before us in the block.
Senate Resolution 632, 634, 635, 636, 641, 642, 645, 648.
The question is, shall the resolutions be agreed to? All in favor of agreeing to the resolutions will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, the resolutions are agreed to. Okay. Okay. Okay, the clerk will report any communications from the House of Delegates. The senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Averill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to waive reading of the communication with the House of Delegates.
Okay, the question is, shall the reading of the communication be waived? All in favor of waiving the reading of the communication for the House of Delegates will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, noes 4.
The reading of the communication is waived.
Mr. President.
Senator Averill.
Parliamentary inquiry. Is the President of the Senate allowed to vote against things like that?
The President of the Senate, as a member of this body, the President pro tem is a member of this body and has a vote under the Constitution, yes.
No fun. Thank you.
Even if you don't like it. The senator from Tazewell, Senator Hackworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for going back to the morning hour, and I would rise for the purpose for introduction.
The senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today we have in the gallery some dear friends of mine from Southwest Virginia, Tazewell County, and they got up this morning bright and early, about 5:30, and accompanied us to Richmond. They are going to help us drive back home tonight. We have to be at another meeting. And many of you have heard us say before, we are closer to 7 other state capitals than we are our own capital in Richmond. It takes about 6 hours if 81 is not too congested. So, Mr. President, I would like for you to give them the warm welcome of the Senate. This is Mr. Jason Schuler and his wife, Rebecca. Mr. Seth Phillips and his wife, Sarah. They are small business owners that has a HVAC company that does really well. And then Mr. Phillips has a small business that does restoration work. And I've known them for a long time. Dear friends of ours, and I appreciate them coming to drive us back home tonight. So if you would give them the warm welcome of the Senate, I'd appreciate it, Mr. President.
The Schulers and the Phillips, and I think Ms. Hackworth, too. Welcome all to the Senate of Virginia. I'd ask the Senate, members of the Senate, to give them the warm greetings of the Senate. Okay, now we are just Senator Averill.
Mr. President, I would move that the Senate stand in recess until 2:55 so that the Senate Finance Committee can go take action on a certain bill that's been communicated from the House of Delegates.
The question is, shall the Senate recess until 2:55? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Any noes? The ayes have it. The Senate stands in recess until 2:55. The Senate is back in order. We're going to return to the morning hour for an introduction. I'll call on the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator DeSteph.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for an introduction.
The senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, joining us in the gallery are a few groups who have spent a lot of time and coming from all over the state to listen to our deliberations today. And we appreciate that they've come from across the state and talked to us. We have multiple groups. We have the American Legion, VFW, Law Enforcement United, Citizens of Police Survivors, which is also referred to as COPS, We Back the Blue, and Friends of VIMSTEP. So with that, Mr. President, I'd like to thank all of these individuals for all of their time and effort into the process and the information they've provided us with, and frankly, would like to give them the warmest welcome of the Senate. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you for coming to observe and participate in the process today. I'd ask members of the Senate to give them the warm greetings of the Senate. Okay, now we turn to the supplemental calendar, which I think has been distributed.
Yep. Supplemental calendar number 1, uncontested calendar, House Bill on second reading. House Bill 6004, a bill relating to General Appropriations Act, designation of additional surplus, repeal of modifications to certain waiver programs.
The senator that's supposed to deal with this is, okay, Senator Lucas, the senator from Portsmouth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just got a communication from the House. I'm happy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. President, I move that the rules be suspended and the third constitutional reading of the title of the bill be dispensed with.
The question is, shall the rules be suspended and the second reading of the title of House Bill 6004 be dispensed with? All in favor of the motion will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Does any senator desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, no 0.
Ayes 38, no 0. The reading of the title is dispensed with. The senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the bill pass and speaking to the bill.
Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you heard my comments regarding my bill earlier this afternoon. I will reiterate, I support this solution to repeal the language changes to VIMDEP and allow an additional $90 million to cover the tuition costs of the waivers. This will allow us to have a solution while we await the results from the JLARC study and other groups to ensure that the program is sustainable long-term. And with that, Mr. President, I renew my motion that the bill pass.
The question is, shall House Bill 6004 pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will record the votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Does any senator desire to change their votes? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, no 0.
Ayes 38, no 0. House Bill 6004 passes. The senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Averill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a motion.
The senator has the floor.
Mr. President, pursuant to Article 4, Section 11 of the Constitution, I move that Senator Lucas be designated to sign each bill that has been passed by both houses and duly enrolled.
The question is, shall Senator Lucas be designated to sign each bill that has been passed by both houses and duly enrolled? All in favor of the motion will record their votes. Aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Is there any senator that desires to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, no 0.
Ayes 38, no 0. The motion is agreed to. Madam Clerk, is there any more business to come before the Senate?
No, sir.
Senator Rouse. Senator Rouse, that's junior senator from Virginia Beach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator Rouse, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members of this Virginia Senate, like everyone in this General Assembly today and throughout the Commonwealth, I'm proud that we found a healthy solution for the VIM-STEMS program. There's not one member of either chamber, the upper or the lower, that does not support the men and women of the armed forces, our first responders, and their families. And although we understand their commitment, their dedication, and service to our communities and nation, we will never fully grasp the sacrifices they and their families have made. But with so much support on this issue, I was taken back by how fast our working relationship between both parties broke down. I was even more concerned with the level of disrespect levied towards the senator from Portsmouth, who is also President Pro Tem and Chair of the Finance Committee. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the senator from Portsmouth does not need anyone fighting her battles. As we all seen and witnessed and can verify, she is the undisputed champion of the Virginia Senate. But this is about clarifying what I know to be true, that the senator from Portsmouth carried the weight of disdain on this issue from people in this chamber that should have known better, from people that disregarded her record of supporting Virginia's families and military personnel and their families her entire public career. In fact, she started her career in Norfolk, in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, becoming the first female ship fitter. She served as engineering draftsman and naval architect technician. She would later command Federal Women's Program Manager at the Commander-in-Chief, United States Atlantic Fleet. She's a senator from the city of Portsmouth, a place that has its own unique military history, a place that is home to the United States Coast Guard, a city that sits within a region called Hampton Roads, home to the world's largest naval base, and home to tens of thousands of military families and personnel. So it was not long ago that my colleagues across the aisle, that they showered Senator from Portsmouth with high remarks and compliments on this budget process. Members stood up on the Senate floor and touted the transparency of the budget process and thanked the senator from Portsmouth for including them in the budget process. They were giving access in the budget process that a minority party has never seen. And that is a direct quote. 39 members of this body voted for that budget. And I believe over 90 members of the House voted for the budget. That same budget was signed by the governor. Yet, instead of members uniting on this issue from the beginning, a wedge was driven by the man on the third floor who sought division instead of solutions. The same man on the third floor that has been a stranger to most of us in this chamber, specifically speaking when it comes to legislating. But the senator from Portsmouth has been here. She's been here, building relationships with members of this chamber, irrespective of political affiliation. So I was bewildered when members of this body spoke the distasteful talk of poison pills and lack of transparency. And when a profane remark was directed to the senator from Portsmouth by a member of the public, it offended her, but it was nothing she hasn't seen or heard in years of her service and fight for human rights and civil rights and her experience during massive resistance. You see, it wasn't the profanity that didn't sit well with her. It was the silence of her colleagues, and some who she considers a friend. We are fortunate to have the senator from Portsmouth, years of institutional knowledge in this chamber, her experience, her wisdom, and that is one of the factors that have led to Virginia becoming the #1 state in the country to do business. So, in this world of misinformation, I like to keep in mind that outside descriptions of members, regardless of where you are politically, does not outweigh the working relationships and respect I have built with each of you. Even when they talk harshly about the Senate basketball team, I remind them that we're getting better each and every session. Yes, that's a good point right there. But lastly, as a proud member of this Virginia Senate, it's a privilege to be a part of this great body. I cherish each and one of our relationships in this body. But one of the hallmarks that we must always ascribe to, and one of the hallmarks of this chamber, is respect and decorum. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator from Hampton, Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise on a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy that we have come to some agreement today on the VMSTEP program. But, Mr. President, I'm sure that we are all familiar with the song from the musical Annie, Get Your Gun. Anything you can do, I can do better. I refer to that because I'm always reminded of it whenever there is a contentious issue before this body. Because whenever there's a disagreement, there can never be a simple disagreement. It always becomes, if I'm for it, then you must be against it. The issue is never simply black and white. I mean, it's always simply black and white. There's never a shade of gray. To be more specific, if I want to support criminal justice reform, then I must assuredly be against law enforcement. In this instance, if I want to see some adjustments made to the VMSTEP program, then I assuredly must be against veterans. That's the picture that was painted for anyone who wanted to adjust a program that's been growing exponentially to simply make it more sustainable and work to the best benefit of veterans and their family. Yet I and others who wanted to make changes was painted with the brush of being anti-veteran. Mr. President, I want to acquaint everyone here with some truths. My father, Ennis Locke, was an Army veteran of World War II. At age 31, he was in a logging accident and died from lack of care in a segregated hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. I was 6 months old. My mother was left a 27-year-old widow with 5 children under the age of 7. I was able to obtain a college degree using my father's veterans benefits and Social Security survivors benefits. Those benefits ended the moment I turned 22. Fortunately, I had a degree by then. I did not expect to receive any additional benefits. 3 of my older brothers are veterans of Vietnam, 2 Marines, 1 Army. I witnessed 2 uniformed service members coming to our home to inform my mother of my brother's injuries in Vietnam. One seriously, to the point where she had to be transported to the Naval Hospital where he was taken. That brother could never work again because he was and is 100% disabled. My brothers returned as veterans from a war to a country that was not very welcoming to them. I suppose that fell into the category of being losers and suckers. I have 2 other veteran brothers, 1 Army, 1 Marine. I have veteran cousins, nieces, and nephews who have served in the Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, all manner of military. One last veteran story to bring us full circle to VMSTEP. My brother's son, my nephew Carlos, and his wife both recently retired from the Army. He as the professor of military science at Columbus State University in Georgia. That's where they now live, paying taxes there. He was commissioned into the Army here in Virginia. They were both stationed at Fort Belvoir for several years. Their youngest child was born there. During the time that he was deployed, during the time that they were at Fort Belvoir, he was deployed to Afghanistan. He had previously been deployed to Iraq. Both Carlos and his wife are 100% disabled veterans. Under VMSTEP, they and their children qualify for benefits. He has no intentions of ever living in Virginia again or paying taxes to this state again. Yet, their time at Belvoir and his having been commissioned an officer here in Virginia, entitled, and his disability status entitles him and their daughter, who just graduated from high school, to benefits and to these tuition waivers. He has no plans to take advantage of that because I asked him. I said, you can do this if you want to, but he has no intentions of ever doing that. But he could, but he doesn't want to. I hope that the same fervor and energy that has been put into lobbying for this program can find its way onto Capitol Hill and into the offices of members of the U.S. Senate and Congress to advise members, our congressional delegation, of the cuts to veterans' benefits in the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. $160 million to eliminate concurrent receipt of retirement pay and disability compensation for veterans. $69 million to end enrollment in VA medical care for veterans in priority groups 7 and 8. $37.6 million to narrow eligibility for veterans' disability by excluding disabilities unrelated to military duties. $20 million to put a 10-year time limit on initial applications for disability. Compensation for veterans. So, who's really anti-veteran? One last point, Mr. President. The gospel singer Donnie McLaughlin has a song that is loosely based on Ephesians 6, verses 13 to 19, where he tells us to stand our ground. And after you have done everything you can do, just stand. To Senator L. Louise Lucas, my erstwhile seatmate, who has borne some of the most vile and vicious attacks throughout this process, I say this. I come from a family of veterans and have witnessed their trials and tribulations and know that I have come to this point from a good place. I have witnessed your trials and tribulations and know that you too have come to this issue from a good place, to that which is in the best interest of veterans and their families while being financially responsible to this Commonwealth. I offer you the words of Donnie McLaughlin. Through the storm, through the rain, through the hurt, through the pain. Don't you bow, don't you bend, don't you give up. Hold on, just be strong. And after you've done all you can do, just stand. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the senator. The senator from Chesterfield, Senator Hashmi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Virginia and Chesterfield County in particular lost a beloved member on Friday, July 5th, and I thank my colleagues for passing the memorial resolution that we did today. This news landed with heaviness for many of us who knew, admired, and were inspired by and loved Kim Drew Wright. Kim was a creative mind and the founder of the organization known as the Liberal Women of Chesterfield County. And in this regard, Kim, and through her efforts, LWCC, played a significant role in local, state, and national elections by encouraging more women in Chesterfield County to serve as volunteers and activists and candidates for elected office. She worked hard to make sure that women had a voice. But Kim was also engaged in so many other efforts. Kim worked especially hard in the area of pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, otherwise known as PANS, and we passed legislation this past session that was largely driven by Kim and her group that worked so hard to establish recognition, research, and treatment for this rare and potentially devastating condition. And she was a fierce champion throughout throughout her life for children, especially children affected by PANS, and for their families. And so many of us worked with her on this particular legislation. Kim left us too soon. She was a gifted writer, and she had a critically acclaimed collection of short stories, fiction, and prose poetry. Her book was called The Strangeness of Men, and it was selected as a USA Best Book Awards finalist in 2015 and received Independent Publisher Book Awards Silver Medal finalist in 2016. When she left us, she left many of us with a hole in our hearts, but more significantly, she left a legacy of collective action, a legacy of strong voices and of individuals inspired to work for the sake of justice and inspired to resist complacency or fear. She pulled people out of their homes and away from muted conversations. She pushed individuals out into the streets and to public forums and gave them the courage to build platforms and stages that never existed before. When Kim left us on July 5th, she slipped from us, as the American poet Wallace Stevens wrote, she slipped from us on extended wings. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the senator. Is there anybody else? Okay, I now call on the senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now recess pursuant to HJR 6001 until reconvened with at least 48 hours notice by the call of the chair of the Senate Committee on Rules.
The question is, shall the Senate recess pursuant to HJR 6001 until reconvened with at least 48 hours notice by the call of the chair of the Senate Committee on Rules? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The Senate stands in recess.
This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.